समझ नहीं आ रहा अपने सैलरी इंक्रीमेंट का क्या करूं।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स के एसआईपी का टॉप अप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
क्या समझ में नहीं आया?
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स का एसआईपी टॉप अप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
आप समझा?
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
Trump's controversial trade advisor Peter Navarro has a new lashing out moment at India. This time, Mr. Navarro is saying that it's a shame to see Prime Minister Modi, quote unquote, in bed with Putin and Xi Jinping. He's demanding that India choose a side and stand with us, the United States, instead of with Russia and China. The images out of the SCO summit in China have clearly sent a strong message to Washington, but it's unclear what happens next between New Delhi and Washington. Trump, soon after Modi's visit to China and the pictures went viral, posted a comment on his Truth Social account claiming that India had offered to cut tariffs to virtually nothing, something unsubstantiated as far as the Indians are concerned, but he claimed it was too late. What is next, not just for India and US, but for the world order, which has clearly been thrown into churn with Trump's tariff war? I'm Barkha Dutt, you're with the Mojo story. On the program today, we'll be talking to leading foreign policy experts to try and decode the images you see on your screen. Xi Jinping, Vladimir Putin, Narendra Modi in a power huddle. A 45-minute car ride that has really got tongues wagging. A hug for Putin, a friendly handshake for Xi Jinping. Can India, though, trust China after not just Galwan, but China's support to Pakistan in Operation Sindoor? There have been other images out of China today, one that once again reinforced the proximity between Pakistan and China, Pakistan, after all, being a vassal state of China. But the Americans, and there you see Asim Munir there in China, the Americans under Trump nudged or pushed or coerced India into this position. India may have cautiously begun a process of rapprochement with the Chinese well before Trump imposed his 50% tariffs. But now it's clear it's a multipolar world order that India will invest in. And with the communication breakdown seeming to now impact both leaders personally, clearly it is Donald Trump who's in a sulk, and there are enough details available about a particularly acrimonious phone call between Prime Minister Modi and President Trump. It's no longer clear what, if anything, can make this situation better. Let me introduce our guests on the program today as we look at the path ahead. Joining me on the program is Glenn Deason. He has expertise on Russian foreign policy in particular. It's good to have you with us on the program. Also joining us is Harsh Pant, one of India's leading strategic minds with the Observer Research Foundation. And I'm also pleased to welcome, just in time on the program, General Atta Hasnain, former General Officer Commanding of the 15th Corps. A great pleasure to see all of you. I want to start with Prime Minister Modi's comments. These were comments made at a public event on his return from China. He first made a little joke about his trip, but then he was sure to obliquely mock Donald Trump's comments on India being a dead economy by quoting the latest GDP figures. Take a look.
देवी और सज्जन, कल रात ही मैं जापान और चीन की यात्रा करके वापस लौटा हूं। आप गया था इसकी ताली बजा रहे हो, आया हूं इसकी ताली बजा रहे हो। साथियों, कुछ दिन पहले ही इस साल के पहले क्वार्टर के जीडीपी नंबर आए हैं। एक बार फिर भारत ने हर उम्मीद हर अपेक्षा, हर आकलन से भी बेहतर प्रदर्शन किया है। एक तरफ जब दुनिया भर की इकोनॉमीज में चिंताएं हैं, आर्थिक स्वार्थ से पैदा हुई चुनौतियां हैं, उस माहौल में भारत ने 7.8% की ग्रोथ हासिल करके दिखाई है।
So, just for you, Glenn, the Prime Minister there talking about the 7.8% growth figures, talking about how these figures have been achieved despite what he calls the economic selfishness of some. He doesn't name Trump, but the reference is clear. He talks about global challenges, economic selfishness, those challenges placed in the path of India and India achieving this economic performance. Let's open it up. General Hasnain, the world is in churn. Nothing is predictable. Nothing makes too much sense. Obviously, the images out of China are telling Trump India has other options. But India is also uncomfortable, I imagine, placing a lot of confidence in China in particular because of the nexus, the proximity between China and Pakistan, because of China's role in the recent military conflict between India and Pakistan, Operation Sindoor. How do you see everything that is happening? I say happening because it's present continuous. We have no idea where this is going to end.
Thank you, Barkha, first of all. And my compliments on the way you introduced it. I think you set the tone extremely well. The gray zone became grayer than ever with your introduction, in fact. If I may say, I think India is negotiating the turbulent waters rather well. We are not taking sides anywhere as such. It's not that we've done a kutti, as you say, broken off with the United States just because of a couple of emotional rants. The kind of information war, I'm calling it information warfare. Actually, what's coming out from the United States at the moment is a very cogent, focused strategic communication which is being attempted to try and browbeat India. They know that India is an important country. Our economy is very, very important at this particular time. India is virtually a swing power and they want to retain it. They don't want to push India further inside. But through various actions, the United States is unfortunately achieving exactly what it does not actually strategically want to do. So I think they are in a very awkward situation internationally. And it's not, as you said very correctly, it's not going to get better in the near future. Keeping all these aspects in mind, India, I think, did rather well at the SCO summit. Mr. Modi has come back in a very jovial mood. The fact that he joked immediately on landing here to say the kind of words that he was using, it obviously reflects that he has, he's very satisfied with his meetings there. It's not that we have made those kind of overtures to China to say we are completely submissive. No, but it's important that we can do business together. Notwithstanding that, the whole issue of terrorism has been pointed out, the issues of borders have been pointed out over a period of time through other visits also. And with Russia, I think the RIC is, the concept of RIC, which was virtually dead at one time, seems to be coming alive, but not too enthusiastically either. It's as if that this is an option in which we could pursue. I think more than ever before, India is looking at the multilateral side of it much more than actually siding with anyone. It's not closed the doors on the United States. It's just too early. I think from the month of April, May till September, in a period of 4 or 5 months, and relationship which has strongly grown over 25 years cannot be just shut off. It's one of our most important trading partners. Our economy is hugely dependent on it. The United States knows it, we know it, and we know that we have to come back together finally. For the sake of one personality, for the sake of a moment in history, 3 or 4 years, we need not upset everything.
Let me bring in Harsh Pant to react to this. Clearly, India is proceeding cautiously. I agree with General Hasnain that it's not like the tap is going to be turned off on the United States. other sort of lower level interactions, including the 2+ dialogue have continued to happen, 2+2 dialogue have continued to happen. However, there is something that is very significant about what we saw in China. I think it's too early to call it a reset. It may be a power flex. How do you see it? Yeah.
Barkha, I think I see it as India reverting back to the pre-Galwan phase of the relationship. Because we never had, remember, Doklam had happened, and after Doklam, Prime Minister invested his personal reputation in building a relationship with Xi Jinping. So you had the Wuhan summit, and then Mamlapuram happened. So clearly, the ambition there was that Prime Minister Modi and President Xi Jinping would lay the foundation for a new stage in this relationship, and we wanted stability along the border, which did not happen. Galwan happened, and Galwan changed a lot of our frameworks. Galwan pushed us into taking certain actions. But remember, even during Galwan, we never said we are not going to trade with China. After all, trade increased during the most difficult phase of the relationship. So we always maintained that so long as China is willing to acknowledge that in some ways China is responsible for unilaterally altering the status quo, we would be fine in terms of going back to business as usual. Now, that business as usual is with a twist. I don't think, if you read carefully the statement that the joint statement that has come out after meeting of Prime Minister Modi and President Xi, it is very interesting that India, in every para of that statement, you find resonance of Indian ambitions, Indian aspirations, India's inclinations as to where the problem lies in this relationship. India is talking about multipolar Asia. India is talking about mutual sensitivity and mutual interest. India is talking about how border is essential, border tranquility is essential. So India has ticked all the boxes in that statement, because I think Prime Minister Modi going there via Japan was itself a signal that we are willing to work with China. But of course, this is going to be on India's terms. After all, Indian forces had successfully been able to deter China for last 4 years now along the border. So I think that itself was a message to the Chinese that, look, you may be more powerful, but we have the deterrence capability now that we can hold you off. So the costs have been rising for China as well. So I do think that we are reverting back to status quo ante. We said along the border, now it's diplomatic status quo ante. And I think gradually, if the trust can be built, and onus is on China to build that trust, if the trust can be built, I think we are going to see greater momentum, particularly on economic matters, because that's where America's economic unilateralism is becoming the problem. And I think countries like India and China, which are two major global economies, number 2, 3, 3, 4, whichever way you count, they are, the onus will be on them to shape the global economic order. The onus will be on them to ensure that the global economy does not go into a tailspin, because Trump doesn't care. But I think Modi and Xi will have to care. So clearly, I think we are looking at a recalibration, particularly on economic matters, but the strategic trust will not grow overnight. China will have to do much more to earn that trust from India. But as we are witnessing, who can you trust?
That's
Americans
right.
have also played their own cards.
That's actually the fundamental questions. Can you trust anybody at all? Or are we entering a very cold-blooded transactional phase of foreign policy? More on that in a moment. Let's bring Glenn into the conversation. A lot of focus on India, US, India, China. Let's talk about Russia. Trump's purported 50%, at least 25% of that is so-called penalty for the purchase of Russian oil. India and Indians don't believe this is anything to do with oil. The data has been pointed out to the Americans. The fact that America itself continues to import fertilizers and uranium from Russia, the fact that Europe's import of Russia liquefied natural gas has actually increased by more than 18%. The fact that China purchases more oil from Russia than India but hasn't been penalized. And the fact that all of Europe actually buys refined petroleum from India after India buys crude oil from Russia. So all of these sort of points of sort of hypocrisy by America have been put on the table. Russian oil seems to be the bogey. What do you think is actually going on here, Glenn?
Well, no, I do think that it's obviously full of hypocrisy. I think that the larger picture we see is the world is transforming, as we've now seen as this summit, from one organized around the United States to one of multipolarity. Now, it has to be said that in the unipolar system, in order to preserve this, it's very much dependent on alliance systems. That is, these peacetime alliances where you always have some tensions. We divide countries and regions into those who are dependent on the US versus those who are contained. So, and we see this also with the relationship between China and India. It would always be in America's interest to have a little bit of tensions between the Chinese and the Indians, because then the Chinese can be contained and the Indians would be more obedient to Washington. So, and I think that this is what the United States has to do in order to restore its dominant position. And we see this also with the Europeans. What has the Americans said? They have to cut their trade ties with the Russians, cut it with the Chinese, and cut it with Iranians, and also now cut a bit with India. And then the only partner they have left is the United States, and we see how it ends up, sitting like schoolboys in front of Trump and doing as they're told. And again, this is the ideal situation to put India in. And I think that this is why I think was correct when the first speaker said that India didn't actually choose China and Russia over the US. It was just the United States who placed an ultimatum, us or them. And India said, we're an independent country. We will deal with everyone. Now, I think that I think with the Russians, this is something that the Americans want to do. They would like to limit or isolate Russia in the international system, but also drive a wedge between these two Eurasian giants. Because keep in mind that this SCO summit, 3 of the 4 largest economies in the world in terms of purchasing power parity were present, Chinese, Indians, and Russians. So ideally for the United States to preserve its dominant position, you would like, this is not good. You don't want peace to break out because in that instance, a lot of the power goes away. So I think.
Can I ask you, Glenn? Sorry to interrupt. Do you think that we would be in a different position today had Trump walked away with a more successful Alaska summit with Putin?
Possibly. Well, I think what Trump wants with Russia is he wants to bring an end to the war more or less on his terms, or the European terms, which is to simply freeze the conflict, not actually impose a political settlement which ends NATO expansionism. And he would like to hand over the whole war to the Europeans so they can finance this. And they can carry the burden. But overall, I don't think the main objective of restoring America's dominant position in the world has changed. So they still have to find a way of weakening Russia. They still have to find a way of keeping the major Eurasian giants divided. So, but overall, I thought the Alaska summit went as good as it could go, as well as it could, because I'm not sure what else could possibly have been achieved.
Yeah. In the meantime, you have Trump's trade aide, Peter Navarro. Some of his comments have been, forget rude, they've been downright bizarre, including calling Russia-Ukraine, the conflict, Modi's war. I mean, from which dimension is it Modi's war? It was probably the most bizarre remark that Peter Navarro made. Today, he accused the Prime Minister of, quote unquote, being in bed with Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin. And then he pushed it and said, India's got to choose a side and they have to be with us. Take a look.
It's time for Modi to step up. I have great respect for Modi. I love the Indian people. It was a shame to see Modi getting in bed as the leader of the biggest democracy in the world with the 2 biggest authoritarian dictators in the world, in Putin and Xi Jinping. That doesn't make any sense. I'm not sure what he's thinking, particularly since India has been in a Cold War and sometimes a hot war with China for decades. So we hope that the Indian leader comes around to seeing that he needs to be with us in Europe and Ukraine and not with Russia on this. And he needs to stop buying the oil. Okay?
So, General Hassan, I want to bring you in. I'm only giggling because I think the Americans don't understand actually the core of the Indian response. And the core of the Indian response is that this is about sovereignty. You will not preempt India and declare a ceasefire. You will then not apportion a role for yourself that India doesn't agree with in halting hostilities with Pakistan. You will then not wag your finger at a country and tell it what to do, where it can buy oil, sit down now, stand up now, there's a good boy. That's actually the tone Navarro talks in. It is actually, when I'm feeling calm, it's amusing. And when I'm not feeling calm, it's highly irritating. Now, what does it say to you, these daily insults that come from Peter Navarro? What's going on here?
Barkha, it may be worth it to go into the history of Peter Navarro.
Yes.
I tried it. I didn't find him saying a word against India in the past anywhere as such. These are not his words. These are the words of the US administration of today. These are the words of Mr. Trump, which are speaking out. And Mr. Trump's concept. No respect for sovereignty, no respect for fellow nations, for world leaders, etc. Everything is me, myself. That's the manner in which he functions. I see in this example a classic case of narrative control and information warfare, of which we have been talking so much in the last few weeks and months. Give a little, take a little. Right? Today, caustic, put it to it, give it to them, hands on, absolutely. Next day, make a few compromises. Come back, make them feel a little better. That's the kind of Mutt and Jeff kind of approach which Mr. Navarro is trying to follow. Not realizing there are past masters sitting here. This is the land of Chanakya. These are the Chanakya Niti has always been here, part of our system out here. I mean, who doesn't understand this? So we are looking at national interest. And I'm sure every US think tank at the moment is gnashing his teeth to see what is the US national interest at this particular time. To drive India deeper and deeper into the Russian-Chinese fold? Or is it to ensure that you have one part of the Indo-Pacific at least to yourself comparatively? I'm not saying India is anyone's pushover, that it can sort of fall over to one side completely, but at least it's on your side, if nothing else. So I just think that this is if you really ask most Americans today, if you do a little survey, I'm sure most Americans will agree with what I am saying and disagree with what Mr. Navarro is saying at the moment. So come a few more weeks, I do foresee. Now, I'm comparing 2018, the very famous tweet of Mr. Trump on the 1st of January when he spoke about Pakistan. And then you see the fantastic lunch that he gave Asim Munir subsequently. And Mr. General Munir or Field Marshal Munir is also in Beijing at the moment, I think, at the moment, looking at different things. So the United States is not looking at that aspect. Asim Munir is also in bed with the various leaders, Chinese leaders, etc. there.
But should this concern us? General Hussain, 1 minute. There's the picture of the Pakistanis, the Prime Minister and the Field Marshal of Pakistan, both with the Chinese leadership, showing who's really the boss in Pakistan. You're absolutely right to say, why don't the Americans react to the Pakistanis being there? But from an Indian perspective, how much should this nexus, the China-Pakistan nexus, as it manifested in Operation Sindoor, concern us? Should it not concern us?
Absolutely, it should concern us tremendously. Nothing really has changed, except the fact that there are some couple of good handshakes going on. And there is a softening of the various aspects of confrontation which are going on at the moment, but nothing has drastically changed as such. As I said, so we are in those kind of times where you have to negotiate the gray zone and look at your own interest. Asim Munir is essentially looking at Pakistani interest. The Chinese are also looking at dual interest, their interest with Pakistan and their interest with India. Now, this is the world of multilateralism, and that's how it has to continue. Mr. Trump somehow doesn't seem to understand that. He thinks either you're with us or not. Now, that kind of a thing, I think we are well past that stage in foreign relations, internationally altogether, Dr. Harsh Pant is a greater expert. He should be able to explain this to us even better.
So let me bring in Dr. Harsh Pant. You said that we are in a pre-Galwan, or we are moving towards a pre-Galwan phase with China. I want to understand why that is. We know that the rapprochement began well before Trump. It's not only because of Trump. This is something, as you mentioned, the Prime Minister had tried earlier, and he really believed, or he had, once famously said that no bullets have flown across the line of actual control. And then we had Galwan, and now you feel we're stepping back to the pre-Galwan phase. But there are two things here that should concern us. One, that Indian and Chinese troops are still eyeball to eyeball in the Himalayas. Two, the China-Pakistan nexus. And I'll add a third. Trump might want to cut a deal with the Chinese.
Yes, so I think all of these perhaps in some ways are also the reasons why some kind of engagement with China becomes necessary. It does not mean that we are going to get our outcomes. And when I said pre-Galwan phase, it is the pre-Galwan phase in the sense of the level of political engagement that India had before Galwan. We are reverting back to that phase. I think, and the reason is in some ways very simple, that once India said that, look, China acknowledges that they are the ones that are responsible for unilaterally altering the status quo, and they acknowledged the October agreement would not have happened, last October agreement, if Chinese would not have implicitly said, well, we are disengaging because we were wrong. After all, they were the ones who changed they started creating trouble on the border, and once they thought of that disengagement process being worth their while, India perhaps would have no compunction in moving back to the phase where we were talking to each other. So I think from that phase where our policymakers were saying, look, we have entered into a very abnormal phase of India-China relationship, to one where a certain degree of normalcy in the relationship automatically comes in. And by normalcy, I mean the Prime Minister not traveling to China for 7 years. Now he goes there because the conditions are ripe for him to meet the Chinese leader, where he can also push his agenda, India's agenda, and hear out what the Chinese have to say on a lot of these things. So I don't think that there is going to be any great grand realignment with China, any great rapprochement with China. But what I think we are going to see more is India's greater engagement with China, perhaps. Both we have heard with the special representatives on the border when Wang Yi was here, he and Mr. Doval met, and they had laid out certain frameworks. Now we know from our experience that those frameworks don't really work, and we know that the relationship remains very tenuous. But I think given the circumstances of the global environment, that engagement perhaps becomes necessary, and that is why we are looking at what we are the kind of engagement that we are witnessing at the moment.
Suhasini Haidar, diplomatic editor at The Hindu, is also with us. Suhasini, we were sorry to miss you in the first half of the show, but we'll bring you in just a moment. I want to just come to Glenn Deason. How do you see the Trump-Putin relationship evolving? The Alaska summit was a failure, but that doesn't mean it has to remain that way. After all, Trump at one point was accused by his opponents of being too proximate to Putin. So I'm just wondering how you see that equation playing out. Of course, Putin is questioning American hegemony, a Eurocentric sort of view of the world, and I get all of that. But yet, how do you see the dynamic between the two leaders?
Well, it's very hard to say with Trump, because when he first took the presidency, he recognized that the reason why we were currently in a war was because of NATO expansionism. He called it Biden's war, also then recognizing the role of NATO. He said there would be no NATO expansion, there would be no security guarantees, and they would have to accept territorial concessions. So essentially said everything that the Russians had demanded. But then suddenly he began to walk it back. He called for an ceasefire, which wouldn't have actually solved the political dispute. So it's very hard to put him to be clear what exactly Trump wants. But one of the concerns is, of course, that the policies have pushed Russia closer and closer to China, and I think this is something they're not going to be able to shift, because in the West there's a very strong hostility towards Russia. Meanwhile, in the East, it's much better climate for the Russians. They don't have the same historical baggage, they don't have the same animosity, but also the economic future looks much more looks much better in Asia. So the Russians effectively abandoned their whole goal of pursuing this, what I referred to in the past as Greater Europe. Their main goal now can be defined as Greater Eurasia, where countries like China, India would be their main partners. So it's going to be very hard for Trump to shift this around. But much like, I guess, India, the Russians want to diversify their economic ties, because in a multipolar world, you really want to diversify your economic connectivity, not be excessively dependent on anyone, even China, which is a key partner for the Russians. So the Russians would also like to have good, cordial relations with the United States. So I think that's part of the process. I don't think anyone thinks they can solve the Ukraine crisis. That's probably going to be solved on the battlefield. But I think the Trump and Putin wants to see if bilateral relations can be improved and divorced from this European war.
That's very interesting, this idea of Trump having pushed Russia much closer to China. So Hasni, which really, I guess, leads us to an uncomfortable question. And the question is this, that while, of course, what we saw, in the images out of the SCO summit in China were all three countries, India, Russia, China, giving a symbolic message to Trump about other options, alternative power structures. Will the big gainer out of this be China? I think that is a matter of some concern, even to India. How do you see it? So, Hasni.
Well, I certainly think, and my apologies for being so late. I got caught in an unseasonal sudden downpour. Just as the way we're looking at what are unexpected photo opportunities in different parts of the world right now. The truth is, China has also played up to this. It's not it's not just a coincidence that what we're seeing this week is first the 20 leaders there at the SCO. The trilateral photograph you're showing between Mr. Modi, Mr. Putin, and Mr. Xi Jinping was not possible. These leaders have been at different times at the same events together. Most recently in Kazan, we didn't see these images. The RIC, the trilateral, hasn't been held since 2016 at the summit level. So China is also seizing the moment where there's this dissatisfaction with the US. This mistrust, certainly in India now, that's growing about what the US's intentions are, especially when it comes to India's economy. And then leading up to the next power play, which we're going to see in the next couple of days, the parade in Beijing, Xi and Putin together there, Kim Jong-un joining them, so many more leaders coming to that event as well. So I think it's some very deliberate photo op power play that we are seeing there. And is China the beneficiary? Will really depend on how China behaves. Because while I agree with Professor Pant when he says that India is trying to go back to a pre-2020 moment, the fact is, at the line of actual control, we're not back to the status quo ante of 2020. We have decided to put, or India has decided to put, its concerns about China's transgressions along the LAC aside, because of what this moment really signifies, an opportunity to move on, to talk about other issues, particularly economic issues. So whether that remains or not will depend for a large part for what China does. Over the last decade, we've seen China employ all kinds of very tough tactics on friends and neighbors alike, whether it's aggressive moves in the South China Sea, whether it was the wolf warrior approach to the world, the BRI and the debt trapping that everyone has been so concerned about. So is China also changing in some way? I think a lot will depend on that.
So let's pick up one comment before I get Dr. Pant and everybody else to respond to what Suhasini just said. Saurav Vashisht, one of our regular viewers, says Japan engages with China in spite of China's support for North Korea. Vietnam engages with China despite disputes over the South China Sea. India has to stop looking at Beijing through the lens of Islamabad. So just a thought out there. But to you, Harsh, Suhasini's point, pre-Galwan moves, but it's not pre-Galwan at the line of actual control. How do you respond to that?
See, I would say that, look, in a sense, responding to going back to pre-Galwan also means that you are also responding to what is happening at the moment around you. So as one of as your viewer pointed out, India actually had stopped looking at China through Islamabad lens. In fact, it was the other way around. It has been the other way around. India had been looking at Pakistan through China lens increasingly, and that, I think, in some ways, given the geopolitical realities of the world, some kind of interaction with China became important or becomes important in today's context, if only to ensure that that leverage, that strategic space to maneuver that you need with a very difficult Washington is needed. And I think this is also what the Chinese are doing. It is not as if Chinese have gained, what did China gain with Galwan? They lost a country. Indian soldiers have stood at Galwan defending their border, and they have not been able to demonstrate any great, territorial, any great territorial gains. In the process, they lost out an entire country. So I think, like India, so I think Chinese are also increasingly not averse to the possibility that, look, at a time when the Western markets are closing, they need a market like India. The scale of it is very important for them. And militarily, they have nothing much to gain by standing there eyeball to eyeball, which of course we will continue to do. So I think on both sides, there are enough incentives at this point to engage with each other and to see how far this engagement goes. I don't think many in India, like we are discussing here, not many people are optimistic about it. But I think that is in some ways one credible option you have, given the difficulties of geopolitical realities. Interestingly, in China also not many people are optimistic. They don't view India as a long-term partner. If you look at their media, if you look at their social media, they see in this, of course, they see a very a calculus on both sides, which is driven by tactical adjustment given the realities of the moment. I don't think anyone is talking about a great strategic bargain out here. But what I think all the countries are doing is tactically adjusting to what the international environment is giving them to play with.
I think that's correct. It's a tactical adjustment. It's not a strategic choice, General Hassan. But, again, I go back to this sort of peculiar moment where Trump is soft on Pakistan. You had former NSA of America, Jake Sullivan, actually go on record to claim that Trump had thrown away relations with India because of Trump's family ties to business ties to Pakistan, talking, of course, about the cryptocurrency deal with Pakistan's Cryptocurrency Council. So you have Trump's kid glove handling of Pakistan. You have Pakistan being almost like a colony of China. You have what China did vis-a-vis Pakistan in Operation Sindoor. You have the tensions at the line of actual control. Yet, I think this tactical adjustment is the call of the day or the call of the moment.
Barkha, absolutely. I agree with what Dr. Harshpant just said. Essentially, what China has also done is not given any concessions. These are all essentially gestures. And these are the gestures which are seemingly to us, we can perceive them as taking us back to the pre-Galwan period. And as pointed out by Swasni also, nothing has changed on the line of actual control. 50,000 troops are still eyeball to eyeball. They're facing each other. But we have come into a period pre-Galwan when at least we were engaging, we were talking to each other. Trade was not such a huge issue. Mr. Modi could comfortably visit, and we hope that Mr. Xi can also visit India in the near future. That's the kind of relationship we are essentially looking at. I think everyone also understands that there may not be any permanence in this kind of a relationship which has emerged between India and the United States. That's the reason why so much of strategizing is taking place in terms of putting out these photo opportunities, these photo ops and all, which are going on at the same time, to send gestures. See, we can do it this way. So the whole world at the moment is trying to reset itself, sending messages to each other, depending on how you pick it up. It's a question of ultimately how you interpret it. And lots of people are interpreting it in different ways at the moment.
Glenn, do you see any scope for a revival of Trump's attempts to actually go home with a Russia-Ukraine deal?
It's hard to imagine because, for the Russians, they see this as an existential threat. So they're not going to yield on their key demands. And that's, to put an end to NATO expansion, but also recognize what they call the realities on the ground, which is that territorial shifts, which have changed over the past 3.5 years, which they also see as a guarantee in case tensions would flare up in the future. So I don't see it happening. Then Trump would have to put all his pressure on the West and Zelensky, because for Russia, again, this is an existential thing, and also they're the one winning the war. So they would have to put the pressure on the Europeans and on Zelensky. And again, it's a very difficult. The Russians' demands are very high, so it's going to be very hard to imagine the Europeans and Zelensky falling in line. So I do think that this conflict would go on anyways. But as I mentioned before, the wider conflict or tensions will still remain. It's not as if Trump's going to want to have a strong Russia. I think he simply wants to find a way of getting the Russians and the Chinese to decouple to some extent. I want to have a very quick comment on the issue of trust as well. I don't think that there's a need necessarily to have a trust in order to begin to cooperate and improve relations with China. I think part of the purpose of this should be to begin to have these dialogues and to build the actual trust, because at the moment there's a lot of very deep mutual distrust. Anyways, my point with the Russians and the Americans is that I think the Americans simply see this as a way of having a new division of labor. That is, they would like the Europeans to take over the confrontation of Russia so they can pivot more to Asia. And this was, under Biden, a lot of people were saying the same thing. We can use the Ukrainians to knock out Russia, then we can focus on China. And now, of course, it didn't work. So I think the alternative of Trump is, let's try to get along with the Russians instead and decouple them from the Chinese. So, but I don't think that's going to happen either, though.
Well, if that's not going to happen, then that's the one expectation, Suhasini, that some in India had, that a peace deal on Russia, Ukraine would make the so-called penalty of 25% on India redundant. That's then out of the way. There are those who say Modi and Trump should meet on the sidelines of the UNGA, and others who say there's nothing to be gained by that, because there is a rupture at that level. And I think even the New York Times now confirming what a German newspaper first reported, that indeed the White House outreach to get the two leaders on the phone was met with some reluctance at the Indian end because of concerns of how Trump would talk about that phone call or possibly distort it in public. So where are we going from here?
Well, I still think there are some paths to a reconciliation of sorts. After all, it's even if you don't look at the past relationship, if you just look at the last 25 years, India and the US have so many common elements. Right now, as we speak, there are joint exercises going on in Alaska between our militaries. There's a huge level of working together, which you can't just walk away from overnight, despite the fact that Mr. Trump's moves make it sound like there can never be a rapprochement. As you pointed out, the possibility of a meeting at the UN right now, Prime Minister Modi not scheduled to go there. Right now, as the New York Times said, Mr. Trump not scheduled to come for the Quad summit to Delhi. But those can change. Those can change in a matter of hours. When it comes to the sanctions on India, as opposed to the tariffs on India, those could be rescinded for a number of reasons. We've all spoken about on your show, in fact, about just how laughable these sanctions are, given that China has not been touched, even though it buys more oil, that the US is increasing its trade with Russia. So if there's no real purpose to those sanctions, perhaps they will just go away anyway. And I think that there is the possibility of having interlocutors. It seems strange to even think about it right now, but countries like Japan and Australia that really have a vested interest in seeing India and the US come back to some kind of equilibrium, we might see efforts by them. So I wouldn't say that's completely ruled out. However, at this particular moment, as you pointed out, there seems to be a trouble right at the top. There seems to be an inability or a reluctance right at the leadership level to engage with each other. And that's going to be a problem when it comes to leaders like Trump and Modi, who don't actually work through systems as much. They like to work through this personalized summit level diplomacy. It'll take some time to rebuild that relationship and then have the rest of the relationship follow.
So I have to close, but I'll give two quick closing comments to Professor Pant and General Hassan. Harsh, I'll start with you. Pre-Galwan with China, tactical positioning, recalibration. Glenn makes the point of Russia having now inched closer to China. There's great talk of Russia, China, India axis. Axis is a big word. It's one good for headlines, not necessarily for substance. How do you see it?
Barkha, I think we will continue to be perplexed for the next few months and weeks by what is happening around us. I think perplexing is, I think Dr. Jaishankar used this term somewhere, if I recall. That seems to be the flavor of the moment. I do think, the Russia, India, China trilateral also has its limits. We know this format did not really make much of a headway in the past. And one interesting thing, and Suhasini, I completely agree with her point that, look, US-India relationship has such deep roots that it will not go away in a jiffy. It will continue to operate at multiple levels. And that applies also to other actors. I mean, after all, the reason why Mr. Putin traveled all the way to Alaska was also that he at one point thought that he could have a grand bargain with Mr. Trump, but that Trump would be more amenable to that kind of an outcome. Chinese are negotiating with Trump as we speak. So it is every country is also negotiating with the Americans. We are also doing the same thing. I mean, after all, we have not said that negotiations are over. Negotiations continue behind closed doors. So clearly, all parties are also interested in having a more predictable relationship with the US. Now, with Trump, it's a huge challenge, but I think every country is trying to do just that. Sometimes it looks like school children sitting in front of him, but Europeans have made some headway into trying to find a solution to their problems. Similarly, Japanese and South Koreans have done similar things. Australians have done the same. So I think countries are also struggling and trying to find their own ways. I'm sure India will also find its own unique way of handling it. The only final point I would make is the more this turbulence lasts, the more cold warriors in India will rise from their graves. And I think that's a real danger for India-US relationship, because every time, you can imagine a situation that tomorrow you will have a deal, but the V-shape, the kind of atmosphere that has been created, it will require much more to put this Humpty Dumpty back together, because it's clearly, people are annoyed, people are unhappy, there is a public perception, and everything that we thought, we told you so tribe has come back. Remember, we told you that Americans can't be trusted, and Trump has proved them right to a certain extent.
That's right. Cold War warriors rising from their graves, General Hussain. In the meantime, it is a contradictory universe. India was the largest supplier of diesel to Ukraine in the month of July. So just one example of many contradictions. A closing word to you, sir.
I would just say two things, Barkha. Number one, we should be prepared for an elongated period of optics. Lots and lots of visuals here and there will keep coming. Lots of gestures will have to be made. We are not bad at it, but I think we need to strategize this out to a greater extent to see what kind of signals you're sending to either side, because we are the ones actually who are right in the middle of all this. All the other sides are all in clear compartments somewhere or the other. We are the ones stuck in the middle somewhere. And therefore, every aspect of optics will have to be seen, viewed, analyzed, and our decisions subsequently taken. Second thing I would say is, more than RIC, I think the SCO has suddenly gained importance. This is a platform which allows us to sort of engage with both Russia and China to the extent we wish to, without sort of sounding as if we are completely in their camp. You've got 20 other countries with whom you're interacting. There are meetings going on the sidelines and things like that. So these are all being diffused. Otherwise, it would seem if it was a typical RIC kind of a meeting, it would show India very deeply in the camp embedded on the other side, and it would send some very wrong messages to the United States. So to that extent, I think the SCO definitely has showed up to be a good platform for us to actually exploit for the future.
Well, I'll just say it shows, we like to say a week is a long time in domestic politics. It seems a week is even longer in geopolitics. Last year, this time, we were talking about the sort of redundancy of the SCO to India's interests. This year, we have discovered new meaning in it. The Quad is what seems to be unraveling, especially if the New York Times report on, Trump basically deciding the Quad has no meaning in these circumstances. So yes, nothing is predictable. 10 days later, we may be having a very different conversation. And hence, it's all about optics and tactics and not necessarily strategy. We leave it there. So Hasni Haider, Dr. Harsh Pant, General Hasnan, Glenn Deason, thank you so much to all of you and to our audience. Thank you. We'll see you tomorrow.
It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Mojo Story and support independent, robust journalism.